Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Tom Morgan Drum Studio. And today we're in the Sequential Approach to Fundamental Snare Drum book, and we're on page 36, and we're going to introduce something that is often confusing to students in terms of reading. We're now going to go into compound meter, or meters that have an 8 on the bottom. And if you were to talk to your average student in middle school or high school band and ask them to explain compound meter, I would venture to guess that many would have a hard time doing that. They might have a vague understanding of it. But in my experience, students that I got, from the public schools often came in and they didn't really understand this very well. So I'm going to try to explain it as clearly as I can. And the book, I think, will help you understand it as well. So I'm going to use this diagram here. This is a diagram that's found earlier in the book, but it's a really important diagram to understand. And so here we just have a diagram that shows how all the notes relate to one another. And we have a whole note, 2 half notes equal a whole note, 4 quarter notes equal a whole note, 8 eighth notes, 16 16th notes. I didn't take the time to write all the rest of those out. Okay, and so far we've been using, I just put an X for the top number because we've had different top numbers, but the bottom number of the time signature has always been 4, which means the quarter note gets 1 count. And we haven't talked a lot about the bottom number. The bottom number always tells you the note that receives 1 count. That's important information for you to know. All right, well now we're going to have X8 time. We're going to have different numbers up here, but we're going to have an 8 in the bottom, which tells us now that the eighth notes are going to be getting 1 count. And it's important to remind ourselves the definition of a count, which is a number and an and. So we've been counting quarter notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and now we're going to count eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and so forth. So if eighth notes get 1 count, quarter notes now will get 2 counts because there's 2 eighth notes in a quarter. 16th notes will now get a half a count because there's 2 16th notes in an eighth note. So another way to look at it is we're going to be reading eighth notes now as the same way we had been reading quarter notes, and we're going to be reading 16th notes the same way we had been reading eighth notes in 4/4 time. All right, so eighth notes now get 1 count. 16ths get a half a count. All right, so with that in mind, if you look on page 36 in the book, you'll see there that we are really going to deal with 4 different time signatures that are the most common compound time signatures. And that is 3/8, 6/8, 9/8, and 12/8. All multiples of 3. So now we're going to be thinking in multiples of 3 rather than multiples of 2, like we were with 2 eighth notes or 4 eighth notes beamed together. Now we're going to see 3 eighth notes beamed together as a very common basic rhythm, and then we're going to have variations on that when we add rests and quarter notes. So on 36 in the book, and again, you must have the book for any of this to make sense, A Sequential Approach to Fundamental Snare Drum that you can get through callenpublications.com. So be sure you get the book if you haven't already. But on 36, we have 12 different possible rhythms that we can have if we limit ourselves to eighth notes, eighth rests, quarter notes, and quarter rests, and the dotted quarter. The dotted quarter now gets 3 counts, okay, because a quarter will get 2 normally, and when we add the dot, it increases its value by 1/2. So now we have the dotted quarter getting 3 counts. Okay, so now here's another thing that makes compound meter different and kind of why we call it compound meter. It can be thought about in 2 different ways, or maybe 2 different layers of thinking about it. in one sense, if we look on page 37, that example is in 3/8. We can just count it this way: 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and so forth across that bottom exercise. And that would be very, very simple. That would be like going back to quarter notes in common time or a simple meter. And so that's no big deal. But the thing about these compound meters, 3/8, 6/8, 9/8, and 12/8, is that they're normally felt with the dotted quarter being the pulse. So you don't see 3/8 occurring at a slow 1 and 2 and 3 and very often. Normally when a bar of 3/8 pops up, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the pulse is the dotted quarter. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So in a sense, we feel it in 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. So we want to get to where we can play the example at the bottom of page 37 fast enough that we can feel it in 1. So it would be like this: 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay? And again, there's only 12 possibilities there, and they're listed on page 36. So you're really just reading those same 12 rhythms over and over in different combinations. As long as we limit ourselves to eighth notes, eighth rests, quarter notes, quarter rests, and dotted quarters. When we start adding 16th notes, then things really expand, but we won't do that for a while. Okay, so 3/8 is thought of in 1. Now let's turn the page over to 38, and now we have a 6/8 example. So now there's 2 dotted quarters in a 6/8 measure. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So typically 6/8 is felt in 2. You don't find a piece in 6/8 that's like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and that's really not commonly done. A march, for example, in 6/8. If you were marching to it, you would definitely march on the dotted quarters. You wouldn't march on the eighth notes. That would be pretty silly, right? So we're feeling the 6/8 measure in 2. So on one level, we're still saying the eighth note gets 1 count, and you could count it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and if you wanted to, which would be kind of a mouthful. But the pulse that you feel is different than what the count is. The count is the eighth note gets 1 count. The pulse that you feel is the dotted quarter. Now in 4/4 time, the pulse that you feel is the quarter note, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and the count is also the quarter note. But here, the count is the eighth note, but the pulse is the dotted quarter. And I think that's why it's often referred to as compound meter. At least that's the way I think of it. So now when I get to 6/8, I'm going to be counting it in 6, or I could just go ahead and continue to count it in 3, because you're still just reading the same 12 rhythms. Now there's just two of them in a measure instead of 1. So I could, if I put a bar line in the middle of all these measures, I would turn it into 3/8 again, and it wouldn't sound any different. So, but in 6/8, we're feeling it in 2. So, if you want to count it in 6, you can. If you want to just count it in 3, like we did a minute ago, for 3/8, we can still do that. In fact, we can count 9/8 in 3, and we can count 12/8 in 3 if we want to, because the more you start to tack on, I mean, when you get to 12, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, I mean, it's just very cumbersome to count that way. Better to just count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But we'll get there in a minute. Okay, so here we are on page 38, and we're going to do the 6/8 one. And I'll do it in with a 2 feel. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay? And that would be the way that typically you'd feel 6/8 time in 2. Now if we move on to the next page, 39, now we have 9/8 time. So now there's 3 dotted quarters in a 9/8 measure, so 9/8 is typically felt in 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Or just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now the larger these measures get, the more difficult it becomes for your eye to pick out the groups of 3. 3/8's simple, 6/8's pretty easy, but now if you look at 9/8, you've really got to look at it carefully to divide up in your mind where the unit beats are. So it becomes a little more challenging that way, but we'll try it. So now we're in 9/8 on page 39. I'll go a little slower. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there's 9/8. Now if we turn the page over to page 40, we now have 12/8. So there's 4 dotted quarter notes in 12/8. And so we're thinking of 12/8 in 4, but with the subdivision of 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, like that. All right, so let's give this one a try. Again, now you can see if you look at it, it becomes even more difficult to be able to pick out the groups of 3 there. And in fact, just to help myself, I'm going to raise up my stand just a little bit so I can see it better. Because it is a little bit difficult to pick those out if if your eyesight's not good. Okay, so here we go. Let's try this one in 12/8. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, good. Got through that. So that is 12/8. So that is the way compound meter works. And we'll continue to do exercises in compound meter in the book. We'll come back and revisit it again at later points in the book and add 16th notes into the mix. But for now, work on these exercises and hopefully this made sense to you. If you have questions, you can certainly leave them in the comments. If you like this video, please click the like button. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And hit that little bell when you subscribe and you'll get notifications of new videos that I put out. All right, so thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.